Well, I have to say they were three powerful readings we had today. Absolutely wonderful. Concept of time, salvation here and now, and the patriarchy, and the concept of feminist theology. And I know what I said to him. I said, when I heard all three, I said, why didn't I think of one of them for the sermon? And I didn't. As a matter of fact, I headed my sermon today speaking clearly, and I probably will be doing the opposite. However, the reason I did that is it might come clear as I speak. And in a way, I've kind of dealt with 3 points, well, maybe 2. The third one isn't really a point. And in a way, you might think, as I did afterwards, saying, they really haven't a lot to do with each other. But that often happens when you're thinking to yourself and you're joining things up and you think, that's excellent. And then afterwards, when you put it down, you think, I'm not sure why I thought the first thing had anything to do with the second thing. But there you are, that's the way the brain works. Well, at least this brain. The difficulty with language is language itself. That seems like a strange thing to say, but yet it is true. We interpret simple text, and in particular scriptural text, and even everyday today conversation. And yet when we repeat it to ourselves or each other, we sometimes understand it in a different way, or we've heard something that we thought we heard. And we contradict each other on what we imagine or believe we've heard. And language, and speaking the same language, doesn't always resolve the problem. As a matter of fact, sometimes it makes the problem more difficult. And one of the best and humorous aspects of this is, of course, the 4 candles sketch by the 2 Ronnies. And as you all know, every time I light the final Advent candle, I tell that joke. I do the 4 candles, not 4 candles. And I think Monica once said to me, you've told that about 10 times over, that's 10 years. And I said, I can't help myself. I genuinely, immediately it comes into my head, we'll now light the 4 candles. Anyway, recently I read a quote by the French sociologist Marcel Mauss, who observed, to trade, man must first throw down the spear. To trade, man must first throw down the spear. And this was in an article by the economist and commentator David McWilliams. McWilliams was making the point that trade mediated by money is a force for peace. Essentially was saying something that's quite different than what many of us believe, that peace is a transactional gift at the end of a process. And he sees trade as being central to this. McWilliams was making the point that David McWilliams was writing this in the Irish Times. And I suggest he was specifically saying that if we trade with each other, and we trade in fairness, that will remove the need for war. So he used that profound quote by Marcel Mauss to make a very specific point, and that is simply that trade diminishes the possibility of war. That commerce is the enemy of war. Is that absolutely true? I don't honestly know. I'm saying it, but I'd have to think a lot about it. But I have a lot of regard for David McWilliams and how he thinks through things. But for the sake of attempting to make this point, I'm running with David McWilliams' observation. Now, I know it's not quite the same as swords into plowshares. The prophet Isaiah urged the people to beat their swords into plowshares and to learn war no more. And he said that 700 years BC. But there is a symmetry between the two. To trade, man must first down the spear and beat their swords into plowshares. But the problem is, with all of us, I think, particularly with myself, does it matter who is saying it? Does it matter to us, the person who is calling upon us to beat our swords into plowshares? Such as Martin Luther King saying, we must not wage war. It is necessary to love peace and to sacrifice for it. And of course, back to Isaiah, swords into plowshares. You often see that as a mission statement in many churches. Maybe it would be wonderful to hear a politician say, I'm not going to start wars. I'm going to end wars. No more war. What a wonderful declaration. If all the world leaders committed to saying that, I'm not going to start wars. I'm going to end wars. That's their mission statement when they come into power. But you see, the difficulty is you have to like the person who is saying such. You have to believe, because you see, we believe, at least I do, we believe it's sincere if you like the person. But if you don't like that political leader, you think it's insincere. And I think that might be true for many of us. It's definitely true for me. I like the prophet Isaiah. At least I like what I read about him, and I like what he says. And of course, I love Martin Luther King Jr. as one of the most heroic figures of the contemporary world. I'm not going to start wars, I'm going to stop wars. Do you see, that was Donald Trump. And we don't like Donald Trump. So therefore, we don't believe it. And you know, I learned from a friend of mine. Gavin, you might remember him. Cahill Courtney, I don't remember Cahill. And Cahill was one time minister in Islington, he hailed from County Meath, and he was minister in Islington in London, and then after that, he was minister in Glasgow. And Cahill said something profound to me one time. He said it in a humorous way. He said, isn't it a horrible thing when you learn something from somebody that you don't like, you really don't like them, and you learn something from them that's essentially true, and you feel, I'm going to have to dismiss it because I don't like that person. And I always thought that was one of the most profound things. And it is based on this concept that if we don't like someone, then necessarily, and particularly in the political world, then we won't accept their sincerity. I know I suffer from that. Now, the person who was at the centre of my trip to Oxford recently, the man that I was trying to find out more information about, James Drummond. And this has I said like the two things connect, but I wasn't sure if they connected as well as I thought they might. But we'll see. James Drummond is somebody I've become obsessed with and want to know more about this man, born in Dublin. And when he was principal of the college, as I've said here about 1,000 times, and I will say it another 1,000 times, he was the first to appoint or to select 2 women to train for the ministry in Harris Manchester College, and they were probably the first two women. Gertrude von Petzold was the first woman ever ordained as a minister in the British Isles, and probably the first in Europe as well. And so he's become my hero because of him simply doing that, and also the insights he had into running the college. And in an address he gave when he was doing a charge to a new minister, his address was called The Gospel of the Spirit. He said something similar to what I was saying in the first half. He was lamenting the fact that St. Paul had become a figure of oppression rather than freedom. And this is kind of true. Every time you mention St. Paul to people, they go, "Oh, God, don't quote St. Paul. I can't stick St. Paul." And Drummond really felt that was wrong. And sometime I'm going to make a little bit of a study of that, because I don't have the authority to speak too much on how good or how bad St. Paul was. But Drummond obviously had a strong affection for St. Paul and believed there was great wisdom in St. Paul's writings. And he wrote, "To us of the present generation, he still has his message to deliver, and his lofty and comprehensive spirit has to be liberated from the accumulation of dogmas under which it has been buried or allowed to speak in modern tones to our modern wants." Now that was actually the 1800s. Speaking about how St. Paul had become a figure of oppression rather than freedom at that time. Now, to be fair, this is not quite the same as my first observation, and I hope you see a symmetry. But somewhere there is similarity. Not liking the person is pertinent to both. Drummond is saddened that we have smothered St. Paul into the suffocating language of dogma, that everything he said is filtered through oppressive dogma and maybe not the language that he was speaking. Depressingly, Drummond bemoans, how is a grand figure that has been diversified and deformed by the devotees of the letter, whilst those who are loudest in their adulation deny or vilify the very principles for which he did and find as a result of our liberalism. That's how Drummond saw St. Paul. For our liberalism and a Christendom drove to see today nation against nation, class against class, and fraud and violence masquerading as peace. So I think, like Drummond, St. Paul is probably worth a second visit, and I intend to do that. Two different observations, both of them connected to disliking the person, and therefore disliking the message because he disliked the person. Two different observations, but a symmetry, and each a double-edged sword. Amen.